I woke up later than usual, the clock's hands creeping toward a time that somehow felt foreign. A soft mumble from Olivia, my wife of 17 years, surfaced as I leaned over to kiss her good morning. "Mike, just let me sleep," she murmured, half joking, half exasperated. "Can't get a break with you at night or in the morning, and the girls are probably up already." I chuckled, brushing it off, saying, "They're old enough. They'll handle themselves." My movements through the morning routine felt detached, automatic. As I padded toward the shower, I caught snippets of noise drifting from the girls' rooms. The usual sibling clash, Megan attempting to rouse Emily. I let it be, deciding to spare myself from the daily tangle. By the time I arrived in the kitchen, both my daughters were seated, their faces hinting at impatience. I wasn't prepared for the impatience that mirrored back at me. "Are we having breakfast, or what?" Emily asked, eyebrows raised. "We still have school, you know." A smirk cracked through my morning stupor. "You're on winter break, remember? Grandma's today." Emily blinked, her brow furrowing. "Wait, what about you? Aren't you off too? Isn't this a long weekend or something?" I could tell she thought she had this all figured out, that her mom had planned it, and I was merely a bystander in the scheme of things. "Breakfast is on you too," I offered, a half-hearted invitation toward independence. Megan, always ready to echo the inner voice of her mother, piped up, "We could, but Mom thinks we destroy everything. She only lets us make scrambled eggs." "Then it's settled," I replied, eager to put an end to the chatter, "oatmeal or semolina porridge. Let's mix things up like they do across the pond." Emily perked up, an unexpected grin spreading. "Oatmeal." "Yes, sir." I fell into the rhythm of whisking oats, hoping the activity might anchor me. Olivia drifted into the kitchen soon after, her presence filling the space. She sat at the table, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place in her gaze, though her face, still beautiful in her casual state, told me little. In moments like these, I couldn't deny her charm, magnetic even, in her quiet way. But there was tension, something brittle, lurking beneath the practiced smiles we passed around like spare change. As the girls devoured breakfast, Olivia's voice, cool and matter-of-fact, cut through the morning. "Finish up and get ready. Daddy's taking you to Grandma's." Emma's face fell. "Mom, you said we were going to the ski resort." "We've packed and everything." I bristled. The ski trip was a promise, a family promise. But here we were, cornered by logistics and an abrupt change in plans. I swallowed my disappointment and watched as Olivia brushed off the girls' disappointment, her voice airy, dismissive. "It's not in the cards right now. Spring break. Maybe. We'll go when there's barely any snow left," she added with a shrug. "Or Palmer, where snow lives on year-round." I wanted to stop her, to ask what this was really about, but I bit my tongue, for now. The morning's chill nipped at me as I lingered in the kitchen, an unease settling into my bones. Watching the girls finish up breakfast, my mind wandered to the trip that was no longer happening. Our promise to take them to the slopes, to unwind together, had been crushed so abruptly, it barely felt real. Olivia's attitude had shifted subtly over time, a dance of evasion I tried to ignore, but the cracks were showing more each day. As I cleared the table, I caught Olivia glancing my way, a look in her eyes that was less affection and more calculation. She had a way of summoning difficult conversations with a flick of her gaze, and today, it seemed, was no different. When the girls stepped out to pack their things, she spoke, low and deliberate. "Mike, we need to talk." I braced myself. There was an edge to her voice, something unsparing, like she'd been holding back for months and couldn't anymore. My stomach knotted as I asked, "Is something wrong?" She didn't respond immediately, choosing her words with unusual care. "I love you, Mike. I've loved you for years." But her voice trailed off, each word careful, as if testing the waters. "I've been thinking. I feel we need distance. A break. It could make us stronger, give us a different perspective, maybe even bring us closer when we come back together." I looked at her, unable to hide the shock rippling through me. "A break?" I echoed, struggling to keep my tone steady. "How long do you think we need? A month? A year?" "No, nothing like that." She forced a smile, but it fell away as quickly as it came. Just a weekend. A long weekend. That's all. I didn't know whether to laugh or shout. Was this the reason the girls were suddenly being shipped to their grandmothers? So, this distance of yours, I said, holding back the words I truly wanted to say. It's so you can be alone for the weekend? Do you even realize what you're asking me? Yes, she replied, her voice too calm, too prepared. I've thought about it. This will give us a chance to grow. It's only a weekend, but I could see it in her eyes. The traces of guilt, quickly masked by her practiced calm. I exhaled, a mix of frustration and disbelief gripping me. This is about Mark, isn't it? Her gaze faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. Mike, you're imagining things, she said, her voice soft, almost mocking in its patience. I don't know what you're talking about, right? I replied, barely keeping my voice steady. You think I haven't noticed? The sudden business dinners, the late-night calls. I'm not blind, Olivia. She looked away, but her denial was infuriating. You know, I'm not asking for your permission. This is happening. I'll be back Sunday, and when I am, I'll show you that you have nothing to worry about. Her words stung, each one cutting deeper. So this is about what you want, not what's best for us, is that it? The door slammed upstairs, and we both paused as the girls came back down, bundled up for their trip. Olivia plastered on a smile as she herded them toward the door, her "we'll talk later" hanging in the air like a threat. But I had my own plan. As I grabbed my coat and keys, I reached into my pocket, feeling the small recorder I'd stashed earlier. Olivia's web of lies had pushed me too far, and I needed proof, some clarity in the chaos she was spinning. Once we loaded into the car, I adjusted the rearview mirror to see my daughters, whose bright, expectant faces stabbed at my heart. I couldn't take them to their grandmothers. I couldn't let Olivia's hollow promises steal what little normalcy we had left. So, as we hit the main road, I took a sharp turn, heading for the highway instead. Daddy? Emily's voice was cautious, but her eyes shone with a spark of curiosity. Grandma lives the other way. I managed a reassuring smile. We're going to the ski lodge, just like we planned. We'll make some new memories this weekend. Let's just keep it a surprise, all right? I felt their relief radiate, even as a weight still bore down on me. For the first time in days, I felt I was making the right choice, a choice to protect them from the tension Olivia had cultivated. The silence in the car eventually turned soft as the girls' excitement blossomed, each whisper about the slopes or packing lists filling the silence that Olivia had left behind. As the miles passed, the lodge grew closer, and with it, a plan took root. I'd keep us away, give Olivia her distance, but on my terms. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally find a way forward that wouldn't leave my daughters caught in the crossfire. An hour into our drive, the hum of the road beneath us became a steady rhythm, soothing the restlessness in my chest. The sun hung low over the mountains as we headed toward the lodge, its glow casting long shadows across the winter landscape. Emily and Megan were huddled in the back, excitement rekindled as they chattered about snowball fights, ski trails, and the freedom a weekend away promised. I kept my gaze fixed on the road, wrestling with thoughts that felt as endless as the miles ahead. Was I doing the right thing? Was I abandoning a fragile thread, holding us all together, just by taking the girls with me and leaving Olivia to her own devices? As if sensing my thoughts, Emily's voice broke the silence. Dad, are you and Mom okay? Her question hit harder than I'd expected. I took a steadying breath, wondering how much she'd overheard, how much Olivia's actions had seeped into their understanding of family. Why do you ask, sweetheart? We heard you both arguing this morning, Megan chimed in, her voice more direct, a hint of her mother's cool confidence. Emily and I talked about it. We want to make sure we're on your side. Isn't that right, Em? Emily nodded, her gaze downcast. Are you and Mom getting a divorce? I swallowed, feeling the weight of their questions settle into the pit of my stomach. They were so young, too young to understand the complexity of adult relationships, of betrayal and broken trust. I knew I had to choose my words carefully. Listen, girls, sometimes adults have disagreements. And yes, your mom and I have some things we need to work out. But no matter what happens, I want you both to know it has nothing to do with you. Your mom and I love you, always. Megan's eyes searched mine in the rearview mirror, her face a mix of concern and defiance. But if you had to pick, you'd pick us, right? Her words broke something inside me. I forced a smile, nodding as I held back the surge of emotion. Of course. I'll always pick you. Now, let's focus on this weekend, all right? This is your chance to relax, have fun, and let me handle the rest. With that, the tension in the car eased, and soon their excited chatter resumed. We were nearing the ski lodge now, the distant peaks dusted in snow, the promise of clean, fresh air filling my senses. I needed this escape as much as they did. A place to breathe, to regain clarity, away from Olivia's shadow. The lodge was an old friend, a place I'd frequented over the years, where I knew the staff and the comforts. As we pulled into the sheltered parking lot, the girls bounced out of the car, practically vibrating with excitement. John, the lodge director and an old college buddy, greeted us at the entrance, his grin wide as he looked over the girls. Mike, good to see you, my friend. And you too, Emily and Megan. You've both grown so much since the last time I saw you here, he said, his friendly tone lighting up the room. The girls beamed, exchanging quick hellos before dashing off toward the lodge's main area, their voices trailing off in a chorus of laughter and whispers. John turned to me, eyebrow raised. You came alone with the girls? Yeah. Long story, I replied, my voice tighter than I meant. Let's just say we needed a change of scenery. John studied me, nodding knowingly. Well, you're welcome here for as long as you need. I've set up a cabin for you three. Should be quiet, a little distance from the main lodge. Thanks, John. I mean it, I replied, feeling a flood of gratitude. Having a safe space, somewhere I could settle with the girls, away from prying eyes and tense conversations, was a relief I hadn't realized I needed so much. We followed John through the lodge and into the warmth of the cabin, a cozy space with 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, and a small kitchen. As the girls explored the rooms, claiming their beds and marveling over the cabin's rustic charm, I took a moment to breathe, absorbing the quiet, the calm that this place offered. Later that evening, after a simple dinner, the girls begged to join the dance event happening in the main lodge hall. Normally, I would have hesitated, concerned about letting them roam freely. But tonight, I felt strangely compelled to let them enjoy themselves, to let them live without the weight of what was happening between their mother and me. I watched them disappear into the crowd of dancers, their laughter mingling with the sound of music spilling from the lodge's grand hall. As they enjoyed the moment, I stayed behind, nursing a quiet drink by the fire, lost in the glow of the flames and the fragments of my thoughts. When they returned, cheeks flushed and smiles wide, they were brimming with stories of the people they'd met, the fun they'd had. For that moment, at least, they were free of our troubles, immersed in the joy of the night. Once they were settled into bed, I finally allowed myself to process the day, to confront the reality I'd been avoiding. Olivia's request, her cold detachment, the lies that had slipped so easily from her lips. She'd shattered something between us, something fragile but deeply rooted. And even here, miles away from her, I could feel the chill of her betrayal. But as I looked around the warm cabin, listened to the soft breaths of my sleeping daughters, I knew I had one mission now: to shield them, to build a wall between their happiness and the ruin Olivia and I had constructed. The tone and complexity established. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, with sunlight spilling over fresh snow that blanketed everything in sight. I woke early, the cool morning air stirring something unfamiliar, freedom, maybe, or a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. Emily and Megan slept soundly in the next room, their forms curled beneath thick blankets, their breaths steady and calm. For the first time in a long while, they seemed truly at peace, undisturbed by the tension they'd sensed for too long between Olivia and me. I got dressed quietly and made my way to the kitchen, brewing a pot of coffee and taking a moment to just breathe. The cabin was a cocoon of warmth, the wood paneling and old-fashioned stove giving it a cozy, lived-in feel that settled me. Outside the window, the first skiers were already hitting the trails, tiny figures zipping down powdery slopes. I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for the carefree winters I'd spent here as a younger man. Back then, life had felt limitless, full of potential, and yet, somehow, simpler. But now, as I poured a steaming cup of coffee, a far more sobering reality loomed. The unspoken choices that lay ahead. Divorce. The word had echoed in my mind since yesterday, a steady beat in the background, like a drum announcing a coming storm. The more I tried to push it away, the louder it grew. Before I could drown too deeply in thought, I heard the sound of soft footsteps behind me. Megan shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Dad," she murmured. Her voice groggy yet filled with a warmth that made me smile despite myself. "Morning, sweetie. Did you sleep well?" "Yeah," she replied, sliding onto a chair at the table. "It's nice here, you know? Different. Different can be good," I replied, thinking of how different had come to dominate my thoughts. Soon, Emily joined us, equally bleary-eyed but eager to start the day. We dressed warmly, the girls bundled up in their winter gear, and set out for the ski lift. They were full of energy, chattering about the trails they wanted to try, laughing as they made plans for snowball fights and hot chocolate breaks. Watching them, I felt something close to happiness, a quiet satisfaction that, despite everything happening back home, we were here, together, and somehow, okay. On the slopes, the girls quickly fell into their rhythm, navigating the trails with a confidence I hadn't seen in them before. We skied for hours, racing each other down the mountainside, stopping only when our stomachs protested. Lunch was a warm, chaotic affair at the lodge's cafe, with the girls laughing over shared plates of fries and mugs of steaming cocoa. I laughed with them, caught up in their joy, their relief at being far from the weight of home. But as we settled back in the cabin that afternoon, a shadow fell over the day's happiness. My phone buzzed, a message from Olivia. A pang of dread hit me as I read her brief, clinical words. "We need to talk. When are you coming back?" I clenched my jaw, turning the phone over and shoving it into my pocket. She could wait. For once, I wanted to enjoy my time with my daughters without her intrusion, without the anxiety that had slowly seeped into every corner of our lives. Yet, I knew this avoidance wouldn't last forever. Eventually, we'd have to face each other, talk about what was broken, and perhaps, for the first time, be honest about how long it had been breaking. I just wasn't ready yet. Later that evening, John stopped by the cabin, bringing with him a couple of bottles of wine and his usual jovial grin. "You look like a man who needs a drink," he said with a wink, setting the bottles on the table. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," I replied, grateful for the distraction. The girls were in the other room, reading or texting their friends back home, so I welcomed the company. John poured 2 glasses, handing one to me as he settled into a chair across from mine. We sipped in silence for a moment, each of us lost in our thoughts. Finally, he broke the quiet. "So, Mike, what's really going on?" His voice was gentle, but there was an unmistakable edge of concern in his eyes. I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass as I searched for the right words. "It's complicated, John. You know Olivia and I. Well, things haven't been right for a while." He nodded, his gaze steady. I figured. But this? Taking the girls up here alone? I met his gaze, letting the truth settle between us. She asked for space, wanted a break for the weekend. So, I gave her what she wanted, just not in the way she expected. John's eyebrows rose, and he let out a low whistle. "That's a bold move, my friend. But sometimes you have to draw a line, don't you?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "I just don't know if it's the line I'm willing to stand behind, or if it's the one that'll finally break us." He didn't say anything for a moment, just sipped his wine and looked out the window, where the last slivers of daylight were fading into darkness. "Sometimes, Mike, a person has to choose between what's comfortable and what's right. And sometimes, they're not the same thing." I nodded, letting his words sink in, feeling the weight of them press against everything I'd been struggling with. He was right. I knew that much. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Just then, the girls burst into the room, their faces alight with excitement. "Dad, there's a New Year's party in the main hall tonight," Emily said, her eyes wide. "Can we go?" "Please." John shot me a grin. "Looks like you're in for a lively night, my friend." I laughed, feeling a pang of warmth that pushed back the shadows, if only for a moment. All right, let's go get ready then." As I watched the girls rush off, their laughter echoing in the cabin, I realized that maybe, just for tonight, I could set aside the worry. I'd have to return to it soon enough, but for now, the girls deserved this. They deserved a father who wasn't weighed down by ghosts of betrayal and regret. And maybe, just maybe, I could let myself enjoy it too. The New Year's party buzzed with life. The lodge's hall transformed into a glowing oasis of music and laughter. I watched as Emily and Megan dove into the crowd of guests, swept up by the festivities. The night air hummed with energy, and for a moment, I felt a surge of something close to happiness, a fleeting reminder of how things used to be before everything had shifted beneath our feet. John nudged me, a grin on his face as he gestured toward the dance floor. "You're still sitting over here," he teased. "Come on, man. It's New Year's. Time to let go, even if just for tonight." I chuckled, more out of politeness than enthusiasm, and joined him near the edge of the crowd. The music's rhythm pulsed through the room, and I found myself momentarily caught up in the celebration. John's wife, Lucy, and her sister Zoe soon joined us, bringing over a tray of sparkling cider and champagne. Zoe offered me a glass, her eyes bright with kindness. "Here's to a fresh start," she said, raising her glass. Her words landed in a way I didn't expect, sparking something raw and unresolved within me. We clinked glasses, and I took a long sip, letting the bubbles warm me. As midnight drew closer, I spotted the girls across the room, both caught up in their own worlds of laughter and excitement, spinning to the beat without a care. Watching them was bittersweet. My beautiful daughters, unaware of the complexities swirling around them, blissfully untouched by the fractures in our family. And yet, their joy was infectious. It reminded me of why I'd fought so hard to bring them here, away from Olivia's web of lies, even if only for a weekend. The countdown to midnight began, a chorus of voices growing louder with each number. As the final seconds ticked down, I felt a strange, powerful sensation. Hope, maybe, mixed with a fierce desire to protect whatever innocence remained in this moment. 3, 2, 1. The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking, confetti showering over everyone as a band struck up a lively tune. The girls rushed over, their eyes shining with excitement. "Happy New Year, Dad," Megan squealed, wrapping her arms around me, while Emily grinned, mirroring her sister's joy. "Happy New Year, you too," I replied, hugging them back with all the strength I could muster. In that moment, I made a silent promise to shield them, to keep their happiness as intact as possible, no matter what the next year brought. As the party waned, I began gathering our coats, ready to head back to the cabin. The girls were yawning, content after hours of laughter and dancing, and I felt the weight of the day settling in, exhaustion curling at the edges of my mind. As we walked back to the cabin in silence, I glanced down at Emily and Megan, who were leaning on each other, half asleep, their faces peaceful. When we finally reached the cabin, I tucked them in, pulling the blankets up to their chins and watching them for a moment, their breathing deep and even. Part of me wanted to stay right there, anchored by their innocence. But my phone buzzed again in my pocket, pulling me back to reality. I slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me, and checked the message. Another text from Olivia. "Mike, you can't just take them like this. Call me." I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of irritation. She had no idea what the girls had endured, how her need for space had bled into every corner of their lives, how her selfishness had carved a chasm between us. With a sigh, I pocketed the phone, resolving to deal with it later. The next morning, the girls were up early, full of plans for the day, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface. We spent the morning skiing, the three of us lost in the thrill of the slopes, their laughter mingling with the cold mountain air. Watching them glide down the hills, their laughter ringing through the trees, I felt a flicker of clarity. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't involve trying to mend the irreparable. After lunch, I met with John in his office, catching up on life and exchanging stories about our families. Finally, he leaned forward, his gaze steady. "So, Mike, what's next? You've been here for the weekend, but you know as well as I do, this can't last forever." I exhaled, feeling the weight of his words press against me. "I don't know, John. Part of me wants to go back, pretend things can still be fixed. But another part knows that's a lie. We're too far gone." He nodded, his face serious. "Then maybe it's time to make a clean break. The girls need stability, and it sounds like Olivia has her own agenda." I looked away, the truth of his words settling heavily within me. "You're right. I don't want to hurt them." "Sometimes," John replied, his voice gentle. "Staying in a broken place causes more damage than leaving. They need you whole, Mike, not torn apart by something that's already shattered." We finished our conversation, and I returned to the cabin, finding the girls sprawled on the sofa, their cheeks pink from the cold and their smiles wide. I knew, then, that this was the life I wanted for them. Free from uncertainty, free from the weight of lies and fractured promises. That night, as they slept, I stayed up late, jotting down thoughts in a journal I hadn't used in years. My hand moved across the page, almost instinctively, as I recorded the day's memories, the feelings I'd been unable to voice. For so long, I'd been quiet, accepting, letting life unfold around me as though I were a bystander. But here, away from it all, a different vision of our future began to take shape, one built on truth, on courage, on the promise I'd made to them as the clock struck midnight. When I finally closed the journal, exhaustion settled in, but I felt lighter somehow, more grounded. I knew that this new year wasn't just another date on the calendar. It was a chance to start fresh, for all of us, away from the toxicity that had festered at home. And as I drifted off, my daughters safe beside me, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come, but for once, I felt ready. As the final day of our trip dawned, I was greeted by the familiar sense of quiet that had come to feel like a luxury. No phone buzzing, no demands, only the cold mountain air drifting in through a cracked window. I watched the first light filter through the trees, casting shadows across the cabin walls, and for a moment, I let myself imagine that this, somehow, could last. But the realities waiting back home were relentless. Olivia's last few texts echoed in my mind, a sharp reminder that, while this weekend had been a reprieve, it was only temporary. She'd surely be simmering with questions and accusations, her impatience building like a pressure cooker. I couldn't dodge her forever. Whatever I wanted, the girls deserved answers, too. When they finally awoke, I made them a hearty breakfast, the kind I hadn't made in a long time, with scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. They ate happily, oblivious to the weight I carried beneath my casual smiles. Over breakfast, Megan looked up, her eyes sparking with curiosity. "Dad, do we really have to go back today?" she asked, her tone almost pleading. "Yeah," Emily added, her voice softer, almost resigned. "I mean, I know we have school and everything, but it's nice here. Peaceful." I let their words settle, knowing they'd picked up on more than I'd hoped. They were perceptive, my daughters. They always had been. "I know, girls," I replied gently, setting down my coffee. "It's hard to leave, isn't it? But I promise we'll come back someday." They accepted this answer, though I could see the flicker of disappointment in their eyes. I hated the thought of returning to the familiar strain that awaited us, but I knew it had to be faced. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would be different this time, that the person walking back into Olivia's carefully constructed world was no longer willing to stay silent or ignore the cracks. We packed up the cabin, carefully folding away the few items we'd brought, and I double-checked to make sure nothing was left behind. John came by to say goodbye, his handshake firm and reassuring as he looked me in the eyes. "Remember what we talked about," he said, his voice low but steady. "You've got to take care of yourself and those girls. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, his words resonating deeply. "Thanks, John, for everything." With that, we loaded up the car and began the long drive home, the familiar roads winding back toward a reality I was less than eager to face. The girls chattered in the back seat, the conversation drifting from their weekend memories to school plans and beyond, and I let their voices fill the car, grounding me. For now, I could at least give them this sense of normalcy. As we neared home, the clouds grew heavy, a sign that winter was far from over. Snowflakes began to fall, dusting the windshield, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. The past few days had given me clarity, a perspective I'd been too afraid to consider before. I knew what I had to do, for myself and for the girls. There was no going back. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the house stood there, imposing yet somehow diminished, as though it could sense the change that was coming. I took a deep breath before turning off the engine, meeting the girls' expectant gazes in the rearview mirror. "We're home," I said, forcing a smile. They hopped out of the car, trudging through the snow toward the front door. Olivia was waiting for us in the entryway, her face carefully composed, but her eyes gave her away. She was on edge, tense, prepared for confrontation. She greeted the girls with a brisk hug, her attention flicking to me as she said, "Can I talk to you for a minute, Mike?" I nodded, letting the girls run off to unpack as I followed her into the kitchen. She turned to face me, arms crossed, her expression guarded. "So," she began, her voice clipped, "where exactly did you go?" I took a steadying breath, meeting her gaze. "We went to the ski lodge. I promised them a trip, and I didn't want to let them down." Her eyes narrowed, frustration creeping into her tone. "You took them without telling me, and you didn't answer my messages all weekend. Do you realize how reckless that was?" "Reckless?" I repeated, a note of incredulity slipping into my voice. "Taking them on a trip to keep a promise. How is that reckless? You wanted space, remember? I gave it to you." She faltered, her stance shifting slightly. "That's not what I meant, Mike, and you know it. A trip is one thing, but you can't just decide these things on your own." I crossed my arms, feeling a calm resolve settle over me. "Funny, I could say the same thing about the choices you've been making lately. You wanted time to yourself? Fine. But don't act like this is about the girls. This is about us, Olivia." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "So what? You think you can just take them? Decide to uproot everything because you feel slighted?" My voice was quiet, but firm. "This isn't about feeling slighted. It's about trust. It's about realizing that maybe we've both been holding on for too long to something that doesn't work anymore." The words hung between us, heavy and unyielding, and I saw a flicker of something in her expression, a hint of fear or maybe regret. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, she sighed, brushing past me as she went to check on the girls. I watched her go, the realization settling in with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. This was the turning point, the moment we both knew, deep down, that there was no going back. We were standing on opposite sides of an uncrossable chasm, held together only by the memories of what had once been and the shared love we bore for our children. Later that evening, after the girls were in bed, I sat alone in the quiet of the living room, staring into the dim glow of the lamp. In the stillness, I allowed myself to feel the grief, the anger, and the resignation, all of it swirling together in a final, irrevocable understanding. This was the end of us, and for the first time, I was ready to let it be. The days following our return from the lodge unfolded with a quiet inevitability. Olivia and I moved through the house like strangers, our conversations reduced to clipped, polite exchanges that neither of us could sustain for long. The girls noticed, of course, though they did their best to maintain their routines, throwing themselves into homework, after-school activities, and their own friendships. In the evenings, when they'd retreated to their rooms, I found myself lost in thoughts of next steps. This house, once a symbol of a life we'd built together, now felt heavy, each room carrying memories of happier times. But I couldn't dwell on the past, not when the future demanded my attention. One night, as I tucked the girls into bed, Emily looked up at me, her brow furrowed in that serious way of hers. "Dad," she began, her voice cautious, Is everything okay between you and Mom?" I forced a reassuring smile, though my heart ached. Everything's complicated, sweetheart, I replied, keeping my tone steady. But no matter what happens between your mom and me, I want you to know that nothing's going to change how much I love you and Megan. She nodded, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I know, Dad. I want everyone to be happy. It was a simple, poignant wish, one that echoed within me long after I'd kissed them goodnight. Happiness, I realized, wasn't something I could force for them. It was something I'd have to carve out from the fragments of what was left, and that meant facing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. The following morning, after the girls left for school, I found Olivia in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, her gaze fixed on some distant point out the window. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words I was about to say. We need to talk, I began, my voice calm but resolute. She looked at me, her expression guarded. About? She asked, though she knew exactly where this conversation was headed. About moving forward. I think we both know things can't go on like this, I said, choosing my words carefully. The girls deserve stability. And I paused, the finality of it sinking in. We deserve to live honestly. This charade, this strained coexistence, it's not fair to anyone. She looked down, her fingers wrapping tightly around her coffee mug. So that's it then? You're just giving up? Not giving up, I corrected, my voice steady. Choosing something healthier. For all of us. Including you, Olivia. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she traced the rim of her cup, as if collecting her thoughts. I didn't think it would come to this, she finally whispered. But maybe you're right. Maybe we've been holding on to an idea that doesn't exist anymore. A heavy silence fell between us, punctuated only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. There was no anger, no bitterness left, only an unspoken understanding that whatever we'd once had was no longer enough to sustain us. We agreed to discuss the details later, to keep things as amicable as possible for the girls' sake. We would explain the situation to them gently, together, as a united front. And once that decision was made, a sense of calm settled over me. It was as if a burden had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope for a future untethered from the weight of a failing marriage. The weekend arrived, and Olivia and I sat the girls down in the living room, our expressions somber but composed. We explained, in the gentlest terms we could, that while we'd always be their parents, we wouldn't be living together as a family in the same way anymore. I reassured them that nothing would change in terms of our love for them, and that they would still see both of us often. Emily's face crumpled as she absorbed the news, her eyes brimming with tears. Megan, always the quieter one, simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. My heart broke as I watched them try to process something that must have felt so enormous and confusing. After a long silence, Emily spoke, her voice shaky but clear. Will we have 2 houses now? Will we still see both of you? I reached out, taking both of their hands. Yes, you'll still see both of us, I assured them. We're going to do everything we can to make this as easy as possible. And you'll always have a home with each of us, no matter what. They nodded, though I knew the reality of it would take time to sink in. I held them close, feeling a mix of sorrow and relief, a strange, bittersweet freedom that came from knowing we could finally begin to heal, even if it meant doing so separately. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and I worked through the logistics, dividing assets, coordinating custody arrangements, and ensuring that our daughters would feel as secure as possible. The conversations were difficult, but with each one, I felt a growing sense of closure, a quiet affirmation that this was the right path forward. One evening, as I packed up a few things in my room, I found myself thumbing through old photo albums, snapshots of vacations, birthdays, lazy weekends at home. Each picture held a memory, a reminder of what once was. And though it hurt to let go of the life we'd built, I also felt grateful for those moments, for the love we'd shared, however fleeting it had become. Finally, the day came for me to move out, a strange mix of sadness and resolve pressing down on me as I loaded the last box into my car. The girls hugged me tightly, and I reassured them again, promising they'd see me soon, that I'd always be there for them. As I drove away, I felt a strange mixture of grief and freedom, as if a door had finally closed but another had opened. There would be challenges, certainly, and days where the weight of it all felt insurmountable. But there would also be new beginnings, for me, for the girls, even for Olivia. I knew that, from here on out, the path was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. And as I took that first step into my new life, I carried with me a quiet hope, a determination to build something real, honest, and lasting. A future where all of us could finally find peace.